Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host, she's failing at TikTok, Leanne Hughes.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. I know there's so many other shows and things you could be doing rather than listening to this, so I so appreciate your time and attention, and hopefully all of these episodes will be as helpful as possible. I guarantee today's one is awesome. Now, last week's show, I was actually just sharing a story of a time that recently I went to the gym after not being there for a while, and I couldn't unsee all of the facilitation lessons around me. So just a note on that, you don't have to wait every week, every Monday for a new episode to learn about facilitation. I'm sure you're learning as you navigate this world of virtual workshops and as you observe other workshops, but also just through your day-to-day life. What are you seeing? What are the lessons in facilitation that you're seeing all around you? Hey, we talk a lot about creating a safe environment in our workshops. And there's so many things that we can do to design into to make that happen. When we ask questions, we can embrace the response. We can make sure we have the best coffee available, just things to do like playing music to create that welcoming environment. And we also talk about establishing credibility. So when you're a participant and the person running the workshop, you want to know that they're in control, they know what they're doing, I can feel safe by being here. And it was funny, when I was talking to today's guest, I was trying to figure out, what is it? There's something about him that he just has this sort of inward confidence. I don't know what it was, but I just felt that confidence coming through in today's conversation. It wasn't because of his credentials, which are pretty amazing as you'll hear, but it was something else, maybe in his confidence and ability to share anecdotes, quotes, humor, all of that. Confidence and also being authentic and vulnerable and very open in this conversation. And I think that's the ultimate confidence, right? When you don't actually have to talk yourself up, but it's innate in what you do. My guest today is Marcus Crowe. Marcus is a fellow Aussie and he's a professional speaker, master of ceremonies, facilitator and skills trainer with over 10,000 hours experience, providing thought-provoking content, impact and energy for hundreds of clients for over a decade. Now, the company he founded is called 10,000 Hours. I love their tagline, daring ideas in a safe pair of hands. Now, for the last 13 years, he co-founded, built and grew Oxygen Learning, which is Australia's leading experiential learning and development practice. Then he sold that in 2011. It was sold to an ASX-listed group. So in this conversation, I asked him about what it takes to start a business, and he's got some great ideas on starting and growing. Marcus has also delivered thousands of keynotes and workshops to leaders from across industries around Australia, businesses, government agencies, top-tier firms. He has a background as an auditor with Price Waterhouse, a sales and marketing professional with Colgate-Palmolive and Mitsubishi Electric, and long-time gopher in his father's accountancy practice and computer timeshare data processing business. Marcus holds a Bachelor of Business and is a long-time member of Australian Mensa. He's a keen eye for applying potent ideas into the pragmatic context for the audience. And that is us today, listeners. That's us. Look, right now, we're 6 months into this whole COVID thing. And if COVID hadn't hit, I was still delivering workshops face-to-face, I probably wouldn't have the webcam. So watch this video on YouTube. You can see us having the conversation. I wouldn't have my room set up in a certain way with the background. I wouldn't be having conversations around how to facilitate virtual experiences, right? We talk about innovation, but sometimes it's only in the context of when we get disrupted that we take the action. And that's a real theme of what Marcus shares in this episode, moving from someone that's super experienced in that face-to-face room to back being a first-time virtual facilitator. We also talk about the difference between keynote speaking and facilitation, and those difficult situations and workshops that stretch you and become more experienced as a facilitator. We also share about what it takes to transition your face-to-face workshop and timing, what timing looks like virtually. Connect with Marcus following the show, add him on LinkedIn, or check out 10,000hours.com. As always, you can continue the conversation when the podcast is over by joining our community of over 980 facilitators on the Facebook group called The Flip Chart. All the links, show notes for this episode are at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 138. Also, if you want to get better at running virtual experiences, Yuri and I are opening Our waitlist for version 2.0 of Virtually Possible. Link to that is also in the show notes, or visit join.virtuallypossible.co. Super excited about sharing this conversation with Marcus Crowe with all of you. Now, onto the show. I'm delighted to welcome onto the First Time Facilitator podcast, Marcus Crowe. Marcus, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, Leanne, thanks for having me. It's lovely to get out. It's like a dog that's been, kept inside for too long. It's nice to get out and go for a run.
Absolutely. We'll get you your heart racing on this show. Hopefully not too many tough questions for you. But for listeners, Marcus, can you please share a bit about your career story, pivots? That word is overused right now.
It is.
But what are some watershed moments that led you to doing what you do today?
I'm the youngest of three. I've got two big sisters. And as about a 16-year-old in sort of the late 80s, I was banging on about something at the dinner table, and my older sister said, "Oh God, would you stop talking or at least get a job doing it?" And that comment, she doesn't even remember saying it, but that comment was something that stayed with me. And then in about the mid-90s, I wondered, how do you get paid to talk when I hadn't done anything? I was 25. I didn't have an Olympic medal. I hadn't battled a terminal illness. I had no story. Who the hell would care or want to listen? And my other sister, she was working at Lever and Kitchen, which was the forerunner to Unilever in the day. And she just done a Rogan presentation skills course that day. And she said, there was a guy running this course. He was no one in particular, but he was lovely. He was good on his feet and he talked for a living for a day. And, maybe you can do that. And so like everybody in this industry, I fell into it. There's no 18-year-old who says, when I grow up, I'm not going to be a doctor or a fireman or an astronaut. I'm going to be a facilitator. I don't think anybody has ever, any 18-year-old anyway. And so a bit like that, I fell into it. I rang them up. I was a bit plucky and probably a bit stupid and naive and with that overly confident. And I got lucky. They just sponsored the Australian Olympic Committee for the Sydney 2000 Games. And so they needed to make good on a sponsorship, which was to provide presentation skills workshop. And now to do that, you want the cheapest seat you can find. So enter the 25-year-old who they said, yeah, we'll take you. You look like you could pull this off. And it was pure luck and timing. And I spent the early part of my career grinding out presentation skills workshops to the people working for the Olympics at the time in the late 90s.
Wow, what experience.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was very fortunate, sitting there rehearsing presentations about how to get the world's supply of shuttlecocks into Sydney for 2 weeks, or how do you quarantine the equestrian horses when they come from the Northern Hemisphere and have to wait before they can get into Sydney, all that kind of fascinating stuff.
Very cool.
So that was the start. And then I met a guy called Gavin who was out from the UK setting up a business in 1999. And again, it was a happenstance cup of coffee. And that turned into a business called Oxygen Learning, which we later renamed as Phuel because we had a trademark conflict, which again was another lesson. And the Phuel business was sold to John Singleton's STW in about 2005. And then that was a 6-year process. And then more recently, my co-founder, Chris, and I, we set up 10,000 Hours about 7 years ago. And here we are, and time does get away.
Oh, it really does. It certainly has this year. Time's been very different this year, actually. It's gone fast and then it's gone slow, depending on, what time of the month it is and what COVID rates are hitting. 10,000 Hours, was that inspiration from like that Gladwell book, picking up mastery? Where'd you get it from?
Yeah, exactly. Look, my co-founder Chris and I, we're about 3 months apart in age, and we were both having our 40th birthdays a couple of years ago now. And when we sat down and we went, hey, do the maths. Have we done our 10,000 hours? And, we'd been doing about 160 days a year on our feet. And for sort of, at that point, about 17 odd years, you kind of times it all out. And not all of it is practice so much as just raw experience. But, we did the maths and went, okay, we need a brand that's going to recognize wisdom as we get older. And is this a job that you get better with age? And it isn't automatically. You've got to stay humble. You've got to stay curious. And God knows we've learned that in the last few months. But it is at least a trade that Tom Peters is 72, Charles Handy's 80. They're running sessions, so you go, okay, well, God willing, if you can stay fit and healthy, then, why couldn't you do this craft for a lot of years? And so that's what was the idea behind the brand. And of course, the idea around skill acquisition, we're quite fascinated with how do you get good at things? We could talk about that in terms of facilitation. What is it that we're good at if we're good at it? Which is a sort of an open question we keep thinking about.
I would love to explore that. I'd love to. Well, first of all, if you can sort of cast your mind back, your mind, but also how you were feeling it as a 25-year-old, you landed this gig, you were audacious enough to ask for it, go for it. What an amazing job. I had a quarter life crisis at 25. I certainly wasn't delivering presentation skills for, the AOC. So that's incredible. How did you feel and were you prepared for it, do you think, as a 25, but reflecting on what you know now? Where do you think you were?
I think naivety can be useful because you don't realize what you're biting off to chew, and you just start chewing, and then you trip and stumble a bit, but hopefully your competence arrives as you stay in it long enough. I think I confused showmanship for quality if I look back. So I thought this job is a performance. If I'm funny, fast, quick, clever, then it will be a good workshop. And I think that's a classic mistake that presenters make as they move into facilitation, because the presenter is a piece of theatre. It's a show with one actor in the cast, but the facilitator is in a dialectic, is in a multiple party relationship. And so looking back, I thought it was all about me being fast, quick and funny. And so I worked on doing that, and one-liners and jokes and haha, but I don't think I was anywhere near as aware of the participant experience and my responsibility in that.
Interesting. And you do a bit of both. I mean, you do keynote speaking and you do the facilitation as well. So let's talk about that difference in terms of your preparation. Do you find, is it hard for you when you get into a workshop to then not throw on the one-liners? And what's the difference between the two? That's, I guess, like I said, prior to recording, it's the reason I started my podcast, because the only sort of podcast that was out at the time before First Time Facilitator was Michael Port's podcast, Steal the Show. And it was all about like honing that craft and memorizing the lines and blocking your movement. And I was like, oh, this is good, but I want to know how to deal with that person that just doesn't want to participate, or how to create safe environments. So what's your approach when you go to the different two? Like, do you prepare in a similar way?
I think if you look at what a keynote is, it's a piece of performance. It's a piece of dramatic art.
Yeah.
And so if you think of it in those terms, the audience has very little opportunity to do much other than either laugh and respond warmly or tune out. Whereas in facilitation, the audience has a whole plethora or palette of things that they can choose from. They can tune out and laugh, but they can also get annoyed, they can get excited, they can get conversational, they can get argumentative, like they can do lots of other things. But a keynote audience tends not to have that array of options, I suppose, which means you just have to know your keynote cold, which is a rehearsal point. And then I think, as ever with, great keynoters will tell you that they land them by changing, 3% that makes sense for the given audience on the day, the actuaries at the insurance conference, the salespeople at the pharmaceutical event, whatever it is. And that makes the audience go, yeah, you really understand our world. And that's often in keynoting, I think that's all everybody's expecting from you and by you. And I think if you're funny and relevant, and then, you're fine. But I think a facilitator gets found out if the audience goes, you're just rolling this out of the can, mate. You're not really here. You just press play on a pre-recorded piece of content that's worked for you previously. And I don't appreciate the lack of nuance and contextual sensitivity that you're failing to display by just, giving me canned stuff, I guess.
And it's funny with the title First Time Facilitator. So you've done this for how many years? 23 years? 23
years and a bit over 3,000 days of it when you kind of add it all up.
Incredible. And I'm sure you've never had an exact same workshop experience, right? It's all been something as different audiences, contexts, environments.
Yeah, I think it can rhyme. It's that old line, history doesn't repeat, but it can rhyme, right? So you might go, there are cohorts I've worked out that I really enjoy being with, that seem to enjoy my temperament. And then there are other cohorts where I've got to work harder to be like what they're going to want to consume. And it's more effortful for me, I suppose. But as ever, no two sessions are identical, but there can be rhyming rhythms to them where you go, okay, here we go. We've hit that point where typically the group is now doing this at this point. That certainly, you start to see those patterns when you get enough repetitions under your belt.
Yeah. And with that concept of first-time facilitator and what's happened recently, so you've got that experience, you've got those hours under your belt with face-to-face workshop environments. What's happened in the last few months? Well, it's longer than that now, about 6 months now, right? We've all had to move to online, and it's been a bit of a leveler. A lot of us we've got the skills for face-to-face, and how do we make this online thing work? Yeah. How have you felt during this transition? Has that experience that you've built up served you? What have you had to learn that's different, that's new, that's been challenging for you, that's maybe got you out of your comfort zone?
It's quite existential, right? So, we lost 100% of our forward order book, disappeared over 10 days. So like so many in this industry, people just cancelled stuff. They just said, well, we've got to stop, cancel, close, And then bit by bit, and most people have this story, things thought out a little bit, and something that was going to be live. They said, we'll do it virtually. And, it sort of trickled back into our lives. But I think the thing that struck me was it was quite an existential threat to have first of all, to realize you're a non-essential worker. That was one of the first things, right? Because I was looking around myself at friends and family whose lives were not only either as busy or busier. I've got I've got doctor sisters and brothers-in-law and others in construction and others who work in social services. They were flat out. So I was like, okay, well, I've just been kicked to the curb. So I do something that society clearly doesn't need, you might say. So that was hard to kind of initially stomach. The second thing then was the collapse of your expertise. I knew how to run a workshop with a room full of people and a packet of pens, a Bluetooth speaker, and a little bowl of those Jilla mints, right? You can drop me down in any one of those rooms anywhere in the world, and I'll go, this is my environment. It's like a predator in their in their ecosystem.
With your weapons of choice.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden, we were like, oh, what platform? Like everybody, we switched on our Teams. We didn't realize we owned it. We sort of turned that on, and Zoom, and we can't use Zoom, and what about GoToWebinar and Adobe Connect and WebEx, and like all of us, we're scrambling. And then what about these new things and Crowdcast and TO and Toasty? And we probably tried too hard to know them all instead of practice on just being good in a virtual setting and then be platform agnostic, I suppose. And we eventually got ourselves there, but it was quite disconcerting to not be competent when you've built up a career where you've traded on the competence you've gradually acquired year after year after year. That was disconcerting.
You got a business partner. So how did you support each other through that? You're lucky you got a business partner, actually, because it's tough. Everything you've spoken about, I resonate with.
Yeah, look, I am very lucky. I've been very lucky in business partner. I've had three wonderful co-founders over two different businesses, and I consider myself very lucky for that. So we're the different model in the sense that, Alan Weiss, for example, talked about, the solopreneur. That's a word you've used where it's myname.com. And I'm going to set the stall out like that. And we went the other way and said, no, we'll set the stall out as 10,000hours.com, and Chris and Marcus will kick it off. And then we're going to bring other people in, and Al and a lecturer and Tash and Jenna and Josh and others that are in the business. And it means, now, to be fair, it's expensive. I mean, we're running overheads that require that. And of course, that's all fine in a normal economy, you might say. And all of a sudden became quite challenging in this one. But then we've had the collegiality of each other. And I guess it's an important phrase we use when you look at group dynamics, which is to outsource your sanity. So you're going, I'm ready to scream or hit the walls or do something quite dramatic, and I'm going to eat a bucket of KFC and 2 packets of Tim Tams and half a bottle of Bombay Sapphire. And I know that's bad for me, but it's all I feel like doing right now. And if you can tell that to someone, not only does it stop you buying KFC, Tim Tams and Bombay Sapphire, but it gives you a chance for someone else to say, yeah, doesn't that suck? Or at least to go, well, what about this? Have you thought about that? And, there's also these things to consider. And you're going to need it from time to time. And we've each been there for the other at different times. So one of us might be up while the other one's down. That's useful because, we can level off. And then, I'm very grateful for the collegiate support through the whole thing. And, we're not through it yet.
No, absolutely not. But I actually had to write down that phrase, outsource your sanity. I love it. One way that I'm doing it without having, I've got friends and everything else, obviously husband, all that. But even journaling I'm finding is just really great just to get the ideas out of my head. Yeah, everyone says it. It's like, okay, I'll finally do it. It's been very helpful creating the COVID diaries that I've got. So what kind of things have you, actually, before I ask you what you're doing in the virtual world to make it engaging and to bring the life and animation and humour that you've got on there, how are you personally feeling about it? Because I guess the reason I got into this career myself is because I loved, first of all, being a participant in these workshops. I was always the one answering questions and the first to participate. That's why I'm a facilitator, because I just love it. And now I'm on these calls and it's like the same 4 walls, the same screen, my neck's getting sore from looking at the same camera. Yeah. How are you feeling about being forced to do this?
Look, I'm interested to hear you say, your neck sore and all that. I think there's a lot of incidental movement, probably in lots of people's jobs, but particularly in ours, right? So ordinarily, we don't stand still, we don't sit down much, we travel. It's quite an itinerant, peripatetic, if you like, occupation, lots of movement. And now you and I are both sedentary. In fact, we can't move because we'll wreck the shop, right? We've got to actually stay quite still. So I don't enjoy it as much, full stop. But saying that, I'm glad we can do what we can do. So the first part is sensorially blind, right? If you think about 5 senses, we see people, hear them, smell them, taste them, touch them, you might say. Now, we might say we don't taste people in a facilitation. But what happens here is you and I, we have the illusion of eye contact. I'm looking at you right now, and I feel like I'm looking at you, but I'm not. So there's this facsimile of intimacy. And, you could be scrolling your phone as you're doing this, as we know participants do that. What if we're really honest, we've also done as well while we've been in a group session, because we know they can't see, just like, they know we can't see. And, those behaviours, if we did them in a live setting, they'd be considered gratuitously rude, right? Imagine somebody came in, turned their chair backwards because they're turning their camera off, and then just sat there, I've actually had that happen in a workshop years ago. It was a protest vote. He hated the idea of the workshop. So he came in, picked up his chair, turned it 180 degrees, put it down in the same spot, but facing the back wall of the room. And he just said, I don't want to be here, mate, and I want you to know that. Oh, I know. Well, at least I know where I stand. It wasn't passive aggressive. It was just aggressive. It was great.
Oh, so before you get back to the virtual stuff, what did you do in that situation?
Well, I think it's something, a useful text for any facilitator is Stephanie Burns and her work on adult learning. You may have come across Steph's stuff, is to take the participant seriously. And so resistance is information. And a lot of facilitation texts will talk about, overcoming resistance as if it's something to overcome, like it's automatically friction, it's automatically bad, it should be dealt with, washed out, ironed out, all those sort of phrases. Whereas instead, if you stand with resistance and go, it's information. So in that instance, we'd let him stay there like that. And then I just walked to the back of the room what I was trying to do was get in front of him, but I made it look like I wanted to gesture about something. And then we talked about, if we're looking at this from another perspective, what would we think? I was sort of plucking at a phrase, and he reluctantly stayed in the room. Like, that's an achievement, right? Now, I think he stayed there because I think he felt he wouldn't get paid if he didn't stay in the room. And by the afternoon, he joined the group, so that could be luck. That could be he got tenderized by being there for a few hours in the morning. But, that's the joy of this craft, right? You get a chance to see what else have you got. So rather than go, bad participant, what are you doing? You go, and here's a useful belief, right? There's no such thing as a difficult group. There's only an inflexible facilitator.
Oh, love that.
Right? So then you go, all right, what move don't I have that means I'm stuck with this particular thing at the moment? What is it that's not within my repertoire of gestures that perhaps I should draw on now? It doesn't mean you always get an answer to that, but if you think in those terms, it at least leaves you with a bit of agency. At least go, well, maybe there's something I can do.
I totally get that. I've been in situations where I've said, okay, why is this not working? I've asked myself during a break, and what do I need to do? And also ask the group that for their feedback too. And sometimes I feel like maybe I haven't got the skill set or the expertise to be that flexible. How have you developed your flexibility over your 3,000 hours to be able to cater to scenarios like that?
Look, part of it's just time. Not to give you an annoying answer, but with time, you eventually get the edge cases where you get the groups, that just by dint of exposure, you eventually come across situations that are rare. So I've had roof tiles fall in because the water was flooding the building at Johnson & Johnson in North Ryde. So we literally had water, not leaking, dripping, gushing like buckets, in the middle of a workshop, and suddenly facilities are in, and the emergency and fire evacuations in Barangaroo. There's the various edge cases that can pop up. I work with Jetstar, the airline, and then there was a terrorism event in Bali, and they suddenly had to create a crisis response room. So I lost half the group next door, setting up an internet line to, that part of it is just sort of time. But I think also you want to be reflective about it and go, what did I learn about that particular instance? How do I, and that's why colleagues are so useful to go, okay, what do we do about people who turn their chairs around? That's a form of resistance. It's quite a powerful display. And you just talk about that. You go, why are they resisting? What are they resisting? Because they're typically not resisting markets. They're resisting the political representation or archetype that I am. I'm an instrument of management, and they hate management, and so therefore I hate this guy because he's one of their tools type thing. That's a different way to think about it, if you like.
It's definitely important to reframe, particularly in first time facilitator mode. Like something like that might happen, and it's taking it personally, like, oh, they don't like me. And then that can really then affect your self-talk, and then your confidence might waver, which then it's a very quick path to maybe even not self-destruction sounds a bit aggressive, but it's that sort of that reinforcing feedback, but then it's talking to yourself, and then that, I don't know, in your behavior, then you're probably not as confident when you ask the group to do things, and that will play out. So that sort of separation of, and just remembering, okay, maybe it isn't me, maybe it's this process, the way it's been set up, response to authority, all of that. Love that.
Look, a useful line I find quite is to say, hey, team, I'm feeling like we're a bit stuck. Does anyone else feel that?
Love that.
Right? I'm not asking them to solve it straight away. I just want to let them know that I think we're a bit stuck. And maybe the we in that sentence is me. I'm not sure where to take things next. But at least then I say, does anybody else feel that? And they might go, yeah, kind of, we spent too long on that. I thought we were going to talk about this and we haven't yet. So I'm a bit annoyed by that. And what it buys you is a bit of time to regroup and think. And also I think the group appreciates the candor, because I think they can tell you're stuck. But then they're just watching to see what you're going to do about that. Whether you're going to try and, fake it till you make it and sort of blag your way out of it. Sometimes that happens. Or whether or not you're just going to whites the eyes, say, hey, look, I feel a bit stuck. We seem to have lost some of our rhythm. What do you think? Yeah, I think we have. Okay, well, what about this, or this? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll do that. I'll set the room up for that. I'll see you in 10 minutes. It's those kind of things that sometimes get you out of a sticky bit, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. And that liminal space. Yeah, Mark Bowden mentioned that on the most recent podcast. He's like, just ask. Like, if you're not too sure, if you're trying to read body language, that's a really bad predictor, because we'll go quite negative. Just stop and ask the group. I think that's really great advice. Yeah. So just a question, when you're moving these events or workshops virtually for clients, one thing I'm curious about is how timing has changed. So first of all, like my personal perspective, if we've had like a full day workshop face to face and clients request that online, like I don't know if something's wrong with me, but I'm like, I do not want to do a whole day in front of Zoom. Like, I personally just don't want to facilitate that. So I'll sort of push back with different ideas with timing and, pre and post stuff. What's your response to that? How are you converting face to face to virtual?
Yeah. Look, like everybody, we've tried some different things. I mean, I think, it's funny, I did a strategy session last week with pretty much an entirely lockdown Victorian group. And we joked at the start in the preamble around, ordinarily we'd be somewhere in the Yarra Valley or on the Mornington Peninsula, and there'd be a vineyard out the window or a rolling surf, and we'd be having a lovely gala dinner tonight with some beautiful wine. And damn it, we're not doing any of that. We're sitting here in our bedrooms, cranky and tired, and already on our 12th hour of Zoom. But we certainly went, you can't pick up a 2-day event that was going to be held in a residential offsite and put it down on Zoom. Like, that just doesn't work. And if you try to do that, you'll just continue to be annoyed about what's missing. If you flip it and go, what does the virtual context give us that 2 days in the Hunter Valley doesn't give us? So for example, you take your conference. So for example, the mortgage industry are doing a good thing at the moment. They've taken their 3-day big conferencey event that's normally, Sheraton on the Gold Coast, gala dinner, comedians, bands, dancing, you get it, the whole lovely thing, all the brokers, all the finance partners. And they've said, we're going to do 4 Thursday mornings. So 9 till 12, Thursday, let's call it the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd. So the broker goes, oh, well, okay, I just mark my diary out. For the next 4 Thursday mornings, I'm going to be at the conference. Now, you would never fly to the Gold Coast 4 times in 4 weeks for a conference. That's a stupid idea. But in a virtual setting, you go, that's quite interesting. So bring that back to us then. You go, take your 2-day workshop and you go, all right, probably doesn't need to be 2 days, first of all. So you go, and so instead of it being, and the best advice I got in the early days was, Marcus, take your training day and break it into 4 90-minutes. So at the start, you've got to get till 10:30, and then you can breathe and look at your notes. And then you've got to get to lunch, and you can have another breathe and look at your notes. And then you've got to get to afternoon tea, and then you've got to get to 4:30, 5 o'clock. And if you see it as 4 90-minute parcels, it was a little less overwhelming in terms of, learning content. Because I remember when we were training facilitators over the years, they'd been taught a 2-day workshop, and he rang up at lunchtime on day 1 to say, I've finished the whole workshop. What do I do now? Which is a classic trap for a new facilitator, because they think it's all the content and they don't have the ability yet to tell stories and spitball with the group and let things play out. So they cover 2 days of content in 3 hours.
Yeah.
So you come to online and you go, right, we're going to nothing longer than 90 minutes as a rough rubric, maybe 2 hours at the outside. One of the things about being off-site is you've got 1 bathroom for 50 people and 1 barista for 50 people. Whereas here you've got 50 bathrooms for 50 people and you've got 50 kettles for 50 cups of tea. And so you can actually have a 5-minute break and it can happen. Like they can get the break done in 5 minutes, which is bathroom, cup of tea, biscuit, sit down. So therefore you can do that more often. So you can say, all right, we'll go for 45 minutes, 5-minute break. And, and I'll use funny times. I'll say, right, it's 11:27. I'll see you back here at 11:32. That's
I do the same thing. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. People go, and you go, well, you're going to remember, so that works. The other thing you can do is you can have homework, right? So you can say, right, so we did a strategy session last week for 4 90-minutes, like a 1-day session, but 4 90-minutes. We said, right, so here's the first one. Okay, we finished that. You've now got a bit of homework this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow. Come back to tomorrow's one with an answer to this question, which you can't really do in a live event. And then you can send out a draft of the work in progress that they're building together. Comment on column 1, Annabelle. Barry, you comment on column 3. And Charlie, I want your thoughts on column F. And you're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to hear those thoughts. So, that's how we've kind of variously worked with it. When we do it, you do something where you say, I want you to go outside and have a look. You can literally say, go outside and have a look. Yeah. Lockdown notwithstanding, but, you can say, right, go and do some desk research, and take an hour or 2 to do that sometime between now and tomorrow and come back with whatever it is you've surfaced. That seems to be what most people are, and I think part of that is, we're in a studio environment, and even Lee Sales on ABC or Peter Overton on Channel 9 for a Sydney reference at least, a newsreader and a journalist, for example, they don't sit in those studios for 7 hours, and they have a staff of 10 people that are there to make up and glass of water, and, it's an oppressive environment. It's hot, no natural light. You can't work in that. Right.
You can't. You'll turn into Gollum. I think I've certainly turned into, at the end of the day, I've walked out and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been cramped over, artificial light, all of that. I love your ideas around structure and timing. I couldn't agree more with you. At the beginning of COVID, I found it difficult to influence clients and tell them that was the way it was going to be. But I think now people are all about reducing the amount of time they have to spend on these calls now.
Yes.
We're all motivated by that. So I think it's really coming back to what are the key outcomes and then how can we use that in between time?
And I think it's important in our trade also to help our clients so that in the sense that they're going, help us, how do we do this? I need to do I thought this thing was going to last 4 weeks and I just wait and do it, but it isn't. It's lasting too long and I've got a board report and I need a strategy pack. I've got to put it together. I'm running out of time, but I know I can't do 2 days on Zoom. So what do I do? So I think it's on us to come to those clients with different ideas. Say, oh, how about this? How about this? All that sort of thing. Lovely things that can happen, right? So you can have in this example, so one of the senior execs is based out of London. You wouldn't fly him out for half an hour, but he can join for half an hour. So you say, righto, in the afternoon of day 1, we're going to hear from Chief Executive in London, who's going to join the call and talk about the 5-year vision and all that. Now you go, you might say, well, we could have got him to dial into the live event, but there's something a bit nice about that he just dials in and everybody goes, oh, hey, pop, Zoom tile, there he is, lovely to see you, hear a story, all that.
Agree. Yeah. There are some definite advantages. And I love that you shared some of those ideas. And I don't know if you saw Hamish Blake, beginning of COVID, he was sort of Zoom bombing. Yeah. I'd love to get I'm still waiting on a time and opportunity and a famous person to just have a meeting and then just have someone come in and orchestrate that. That would be super cool.
Well, that could be you, Leanne. You might be that person. And suddenly Leanne Hughes parachutes into the session.
Ooh, yeah.
With predictably unpredictable predictions.
Yeah, very unpredictable. Marcus, you've got a really good sense of humour. Is that something that, you're just a funny guy? Have you sharpened your humour over the years?
Look, definitely yes to the second question. You sharpen humour by being unfunny, because you find out what works, right? That's why comedians, if you read, there's a lovely book, Little Bets, that talks about how Chris Rock goes to the little comedy clubs on a Tuesday night where it's, $10 and a free drink to get in. And he's not on the bill, but he just goes in the back door. And then the guy hosting for that night says, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a little bit of a surprise. You might know his name. It's Chris Rock. And he comes out with a clipboard. He's literally got a clipboard and a ballpoint pen. He goes, hi guys, I'm just testing some material. All right, so we're in the cack shop. Why are these muffins so big? And he does the bit. And then he says, what do you think? Is that funny? What about if I did it like this? What if I reversed the joke? And he tests it, right? So if you look at that in terms of how do comedians hone their craft, facilitators, I guess, get a chance with a live audience to try things. And you find out what's funny. You find out what isn't funny. You do it long enough, you find out what used to be funny and these days is no longer funny. So there are some things, we would, tell some stories because we kind of prided ourselves on trying to find the edge where you can't go past and then just take half a step back.
Nice.
So that the audience is left there going, oh, and you're kind of going, well, that's you doing that. I just sort of said this. And, if you've gone there in your mind, well,
it's very Jimmy Carr.
In a way, yeah. But obviously Jimmy Carr,
he'll go.
Well, A, he goes further, but B, that's the deal with him, right? You go, don't come to my room. Like, you're coming to my room, you know what I'm about, you can expect it. Whereas I think in our line of work, the reason humour can be so useful is they don't expect it. So, see, when you go to a comedy club, the crowd sits there, arms crossed, going, righto, mate, you said you're funny, be funny, make me laugh. Right? Whereas when we go in, they don't have that demand on us. So if we're funny, they're delighted. They go, wow, I didn't expect to laugh while I'm at this. That's handy. That's a bonus. So I think it's quite a useful vehicle for a facilitator, provided it's not like anything, right? It can be a tool to avoid work, which you got to watch, that you don't get seduced by the humour, and in so doing, you don't have the discussion that needs to happen.
Yeah, it is an interesting line. And just at the beginning, you spoke about performer, and I'm just busy reflecting on that versus like, how much am I a performer versus facilitator? Like, what's my ratio? Where do I sit right now? It's a really good question to prompt us. And it's funny that you mentioned Chris Rock does that. I didn't, when I was in New York last year, Jimmy Fallon, he does like before every filming of The Tonight Show, he'll do like a live reading of what he's going to perform that night. And if the joke doesn't land, he won't say it. So he's just doing it every day before he goes live.
Yeah, I think they're so instructive. What we see is the lovely curated bit that's perfect, but what we don't see is the ugly grind that delivered them the curation. And I think that for facilitators is important to embrace the fact that there's grind to get to the good stuff.
Yeah, grind that links into your 10,000 hours. Now, I just want to switch the conversation, because you've been running this, you've been doing different businesses, sold businesses, built businesses, done really well in business life. Got facilitators that are working internally that want to start their own solopreneur business or consulting agency. What would be your advice for people that want to do that? It seems like during COVID, which is like during the riskiest market, a lot of people are like, I'm at home, I've lost all the desire to work, because the reason I love work was because of the coffees and the people. Now that's gone, it's just the work, and I'm realizing how much it doesn't really fulfill me, and now they sort of want to explore other options.
Well, first of all, good luck to you. From the bottom of my heart, like it's been very kind to me. It's a lovely thing to do for a living. It's a very privileged position, because, if you sell curtains for a living, well, you meet everybody's windows, I suppose. When you do this for a living, you hear people's lives, concerns, aspirations, frustrations. It's quite a privileged position, and you get this sort of vicarious employment, because for 2 days you work for the bank, and for 2 days you work for the drug company, and then for another day you work for the insurer, and then next week you're in the government agency. And people would love to think that's incredible exposure. So good luck to anybody who's having that thought. Here's a bit of my 2 cents of thought about it. If you're in an internal role, because typically what happens is they all do a spreadsheet, because they know what they've been paying to get the vendor to come in, and they know the cost, right? And they know how many days they got for that, and they know their own salary, and they've been doing a few workshops internally. So they say to themselves, all right, well, I do 2 days a week, that's 8 days a month. I do that for 10 months of the year, that's 80 days. What if I could get half the day rate that I've been paying this vendor, and they times 80 by half, and then they end up with this nice number like $160,000. And then they go, and all I'd have to have is a laptop, a mobile phone, a website, and some cloud accounting. And they deduct that and they go, yep, I reckon I can live on $120,000 a year. Is that roughly the sort of spreadsheet you made back when?
That's exactly, back of a Post-it note or,
And you know what? It's not wrong. It's a good rubric for going, right. Now, here's the catch. The 2 days a week that you've been doing, you didn't have to find them. You had a customer that couldn't choose. The customer had to have you because you're the internal resource. And the market-facing side of facilitation businesses is the bit you haven't experienced. Now, you can get lucky. I've met a lot of facilitators who, and in fact, a common one is they leave their firm and then the firm hires them back to continue to deliver, but now just paying them a day rate. And so they end up going, God, I'm pretty much making my salary. I'm only working 6 days of the month, not 22. And I've got time to go shopping and have a bit of a life and look at other things. So they have this lovely honeymoon. And then that project ends, as these things all do, right? We don't sell retainer style work the way an ad agency might, for example. Part of the problem is that you can train them out, right? So that's one of the problems is you do the program and eventually everyone's gone through it, right? And so they go, well, it's done. So what's next? And so my cautionary advice would be for people going into it, it's one thing to love the craft in front of room and all of that, and that is important. But you've also, and I think Alan Weiss talked about this, you also need to think about the market-facing side of it and going, Who are my clients? Who knows me? What am I known for? So if I've come out of financial services and I reckon I can do net promoter score workshops for financial services, customer facing roles, let's pick a little territory. And you might say, okay, good. That's your space. Now you live in Melbourne. So you've probably worked for NAB or ANZ and you've done it there. Can you work for the other one? And or do you have relationships up into Sydney to get to CBA and Westpac to give, these are Australian examples for our offshore listeners. But it's thinking about that market-facing side of it. Because strategically, the decision you have to make in these businesses is, are you going to separate the selling from the delivery? And are you going to employ the facilitator or are you going to rent them on a day-by-day basis? They're basically the two strategic choices. And so for solopreneurs, they're saying, no, I'm going to eat what I'm going to kill. Right? That's going to be me. Which means you've got to be able to kill, right? It's one thing to do the eating, you've got to kill.
You got to kill.
Bit of a crass metaphor, but you get
I love it.
That'd be my thoughts.
Yeah. It reminds me of what Seth Godin said, something about easy, hard and hard. Something about consultancy. If you want to be a good consultant, the easy, hard part is being good enough to be a consultant and getting results. The hard part is getting people aware of you and knowing that you deliver those results. That's the hard part, the marketing. And I think you're right. A lot of people go into it. I'm a year and a half out. But I guess my approach was always about the marketing and not leaving my corporate job until I had an audience and sort of lowering that risk. And in terms of personal and professional development, every single day, it's been the biggest learning curve. Yeah. And you never really switch off. You're always sort of trying to problem solve.
Yeah, I think that phrase there, you never really switch off. I think facilitation's a lifestyle in a sense that watch a mother and a child at the supermarket checkout queue as the child grabs a packet of lollies and puts it on the conveyor belt to buy. And watch that mother deal with that with an audience of people watching that mother deal with that, and she knows they're watching. Now you get to watch a little group dynamic right there, right? And so I think if this really gets under your skin, as it has for me, and I think it does for people who stay for a long time in it, you're always thinking about how people do things with people. You watch someone complain at the check-in counter because the plane's late and they, you watch that and you go, okay, there's an example of interpersonal dynamics and what's going on for that person. Why might they be furious? Are they just egomaniacs or did they get a cancer diagnosis last night? All those things are things you might want to think about as you challenge yourself to take in the tapestry of humanity.
Absolutely. My most recent podcast episode was just sharing a story of a gym class I went to recently and what all the facilitation lessons I learned from that. And now it's so true, Marcus, everything that happens in life now, it's either a story for a workshop or it's something I can capture for LinkedIn. So it's either for the craft or for the content.
Yeah, spot on. That's a great way to think. Yeah. And then you don't have to worry about where's my next piece of material coming from. If you just stay alert to the world.
Absolutely. Curate, not create. It's awesome. So Marcus, any final words or advice for first-time facilitators? Anyone listening to the show? It can be about business or delivery. You've shared so much today. How would you sum it up?
Well, let's maybe take the two pieces in turn. So on the craft, and I see it as a craft, we're all humbled in the last 6 months as we were confronted with incompetence. But if you take a craft approach, your fifth webinar is going to be better than your first one. So just like your fifth draft of your book's going to be better than your first one. Annie Lamont, who's an author, writes about ugly first drafts or shitty first drafts. So I'd encourage facilitators to go, rather than wonder about the tool, the tech, the mirror, the mural, the toasty, the whatever, all these different things, just log in, create an account, kick around with it, invite one of your friends to it. That's how you're going to find out if it's any good kind of thing. So I'd encourage that sort of craft experimentation. Just, you sort of go, do I try this? Try and exercise. Funny, a colleague I had years ago, Ben, he used to say, I try and ask myself, what's something I can do in this workshop that I've never done before? So it might just be taking an old exercise and doing it a different way. But I think that's a lovely way to just go, today I did it with them just sitting down. Or today I did it in pairs. Normally they do groups of 4. Or today what I did was I made them watch a video before they then, whatever. I think that's a useful kind of way just to keep the craft going. And then for those listening that are on the business side of it, you cannot get away from the market-facing kinds of demands. And some of the inspirations that can help you there are the enterprise B2B salespeople that roll around on LinkedIn. And there's a bunch of them out there. And look, like everything, there's some signal and there's some noise in what's been produced. But because they're talking to an audience that unashamedly is a sales professional, so they get that I'm here to sell. Whereas I think for facilitators, they are reluctant salespeople. When somebody says, you're going to need to do them selling, and they go, really? I don't really want to do that. Can't the phone just ring and they buy more workshops? Which of course can happen and does happen. But you might want to embrace the sales disciplines of the people who proudly recognize themselves as being professional salespeople.
Yeah, that's something I definitely got away from Alan Weiss. He was, that line of you're not being shot at, so just pick up the phone. It was like, ooh.
Yeah, and you make your approach. You might say, look, I saw, imagine Leanne was the head of OD for clients I admire and want to work with. Hey, Leanne, I saw your recent post about the challenges of lockdown. It prompted me to get in touch. We work with client you would admire A, client you would admire B, client you would admire C, doing thing you would like to solve 1 or thing you would like to solve 2. What's the best way to put 20 minutes in your diary to talk a bit more? Something like that.
Awesome. Thanks for that template.
Now, you do that, but you notice how it's not automated off a bot, right? That's me writing to Leanne. I've got a comment on the thing that I saw that you... But if you did 10 of those, 4 days of a week, that's 40. That's 160 in a month, 10 months of the year. That's 1,600 bits of outreach. Anyone in the game will say that activity is productivity. So if you're doing those things, good things should accrue, I would think.
Yes, I agree. I'm just writing down that one. Activity is productivity. You've given me so many. I mean, I know you said it's not about the one-liners, but I've got quite a few stacked up, written down in my notebook already. Yes. Marcus, if people would like to get in touch with you, find out all about the work that you do, where can we send them?
Well, for the business, we're at 10,000hours.com, which is 1 with 4 zeros, hours.com. There's lots of ways to get that wrong, I've noticed. It's not the words, it's the number, 10,000hours.com. And you'll find me easily enough on LinkedIn. I'm out there like everybody. I think we're all wasting our time, and in about 30 years, we'll look back and go, what were we thinking? But for the moment, it seems to be a game we're playing. So I'm playing that game too, like you are, doing it so well. And it's lovely to spend some time together and chat.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love LinkedIn. Definitely hit up Marcus on there, comment on everything that he does, send him a message, let him know what you thought of this show. Marcus, it's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you on this one. Thanks for sharing all your expertise.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight, and make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.